Hello and welcome to episode 9. I'm honored to welcome to the podcast Mr. Yubin Lee. Yubin, welcome.
Hello, Nick.
Today we're starting with our quantum mechanics introduction. Highly recommended topic. You were not a fan initially. You had the same stance as Einstein back in high school. Mm-hmm. What changed?
Well, I feel like quantum mechanics is one of those things where if you look at it for the first time, you don't really get a sense of what's going on. Like, it feels as though everything is made up. It doesn't really make any sense. But once you keep looking into it and you start vaguely grasping your head around it, it's actually a very intriguing topic that's quite interesting to dig into. So, yeah.
I agree, yeah, because I went down that road back in 11th grade. And I just kept digging, man. Let's start with what is quantum mechanics. Quantum is basically the study of our second world, where scales and measurements are very different than real life, where we usually we study particles and atoms, how they move and behave, so about 10 to the negative 10 of a meter. It's the physics that behave, which you've seen, is very different than our own world, which abides by Newton's laws of physics. So last time I covered electrons and how they move, how they behave. Let's move on to something a bit more advanced. Talk about Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. Heisenberg was one of the first founders, if you will, of quantum mechanics. He had a long debate with Einstein. Do you remember the quote?
It's the God does not play dice versus God does play dice.
So Einstein said, God does not play dice with the universe. Heisenberg answered, God does not only play dice, but he throws it under the table where no one can see. Mm-hmm. So what he's referring to is his own principle, which basically says the location or delta x of a particle and times the momentum of it has to be less or equal to Planck's constant divided by 2 pi divided by 2. So that's 4 pi. Which in layman's terms means you cannot precisely know the position or the speed of a certain particle, quantum particle, in space. The reason for that, with the duality of particle and wave. So how that works, you have, for every particle has a certain wave pattern, and with that wave pattern, you can only find that particle in the peaks of the wave. So they're basically intertwined. If you're trying to measure a greater velocity or a more precise velocity, you lose the context of the distance that it travels, and vice versa. That's the basic rundown of Heisenberg. So with the addition of Heisenberg came Erwin Schrödinger. So if you could cover that, Yubin.
Okay, so with Schrödinger, he came up basically with something called a wave function. This might be a bit complicated, but in layman's terms, it's just a function that tells you how the wave is moving. So when you first start off with quantum mechanics and with Schrdinger's equation, you usually deal with one-dimensional time-independent equations. It's just a fancy way of saying how a wave moves in one dimension without considering time. Now, this wave equation extends all the way to four-dimensional space-time, a word that a lot of us have heard of. So what Schrödinger's wave equation allows us to do is we can actually mathematically describe the wave function of a quantum particle. So a quantum particle both has properties of a wave and properties of a particle. Now, with this wave function, we can actually describe that wave behavior. And if we get into more detail, we have the square of the wave function is the probability. And this is when all the cool things come in, like quantum tunneling. But I'll leave that for another episode.
All right. So that's basically it. Rundown of quantum mechanics. Brought to you by Dr. Yubin Lee and myself. Thank you so much for listening. We'll hopefully see you guys next time.